At the end of Splatoon 2, I did a video called Forever Painfully Average, the unfortunate state of Splatlings, where I talked about despite how good the main weapons look on paper, Splatlings see shockingly little competitive use, and how those things could be fixed. Well now, 2 years later, unfortunately we're suffering from a lot of the same problems. In fact, out of 6 Splatlings, there's only 1 that sees significant competitive use. So today I want to talk about what happens where this class is still in the same spot all these years later, and how can it be fixed. I think there are 3 main issues. The first one is the weapon kits don't often match the role. So, for example, I think Mini Splatling has the biggest issue here. This weapon was given 2 very aggressive kits, with Burst Bomb Ultra Stamp and Mist Bubble. I know the Bubble kit looks a little more supportive, but I'll get into why I don't think it actually plays that way. As a main weapon, Mini Splatlings are most comparable to other short-range shooters, such as the N-Zap or Splattershot. These are typically the supportive weapon in comps these days, in charge of holding down paint control and getting specials to help the team get in. Mini Splatling is really good at painting, and its mobility stat gives it a little bit better of a job fighting for itself than those short-range shooters do, which is part of what makes it such a good main weapon right now. However, neither of its kits are sufficient in getting its team in, severely limiting the styles of comps it could be played with. For the vanilla kit, this is a little bit more obvious. Stamp isn't going to be a way you're going to get your mid-lines forward. However, the Bubble kit is one that I think I've realized a bit more recently why it doesn't work as much. The 2 main weapons being used with Bubble right now are the Splat Roller and Mint Decavitator, both very aggressive weapons. I think that Bubble is pretty decent right now, as when it is set up it takes a lot of resources to take down with all the HP buffs it's gotten over time. However, this fits much better on midline weapons. If you play Roller for instance, a Neosplash can use its Tri-Strikes to get you in, where you'll then deploy your Bubble. But if you're playing Mini, taking up that short-range shooter slot, you're now dependent on these mid-range weapons that aren't going to get as much specials and paint to get you in. And then when you get in and use that Bubble, rather than having something like a Roller or Decavitator that are almost impossible to force out of the bubble, you have a weapon that's a lot easier to rush down, and if anything might feel a little bit more limited since its mobility clashes with the HP shield. None of this is to say that either of the kits are terrible. I think they're actually quite okay. Burst Bomb is still pretty threatening on Mini, and the amount of bubbles it gets does make it a decent combat threat for the Zinc one. But if it's gonna see use, it's going to be more as this midline fighting weapon, rather than the supportive comp opening role that I think it could and probably should be. Number 2, longer range weapons like Chargers are too harsh of a counter. It feels impossible to talk about Splatlings without talking about Chargers. In fact, I think the best example of this is a restriction tournament held by Kyo. In this case, things like Zuka were limited, but most importantly, long-range chargers like Pencil, Splat Charger, and E-Liter were entirely banned. This tournament was won by a heavy Splatling. Splatlings, compared to any other weapon class, spend the most amount of time not being hidden in their ink, meaning they have the most limited mobility, and unlike something like a Blaster or Bucket, they have no form of area of effect to hit behind cover, meaning these weapons are often going to be occupying the exact same spaces as Chargers, making them a significant counter, especially something like Pencil that's so common. These weapons can kill much faster than them, while also having more range to be able to sit away from wherever Splatlings can counterplay them. This has been a consistent issue for Splatlings, and unless if the meta enables a lot of comps that don't have an anchor, which isn't the case right now, it's going to make it hard for Splatlings to see use. In that one case they do very well in. Heavy Splatling is a good example of this, where outside of the restriction tournament, Heavy saw a good bit of use early into the game when people were picking things like Splash instead of other anchors. However, the second things like Pencil, Leader, or other backlines started being picked, Heavy immediately fell out of favor. Number 3 is also related to kits, being proper toolkits to deal with its counters. Let's talk about the Splatling that used to be in the best spot, Ballpoint. This one has one of the best kits in the game, Fizzy Bomb and Inkjets. So why don't we see it as much right now? Well, the main issue is that Ballpoint struggles not only with these long-range weapons I mentioned previously, but also against midline options. The meta right now allows more harsh counters than we used to see before. For example, Charger and Blaster is a pair you could almost never see before, but with Pencil providing a good amount of paint output, it's possible to run things like Pencil plus Range Blaster. And that's not even talking about Squeezer, a weapon with very similar range to Ballpoint, good mobility, and a wall that works exceptionally well into it. Basically, there's a bunch of weapons that do very well into Ballpoint right now. That means you're dealing with a lot of counters at the same time. But I mentioned the toolkit specifically. Ballpoint has Inkjet, and while Inkjet is a very very solid special, you'll notice that it struggles against pretty much the exact same things Ballpoint does. Things like chargers, blasters, squeezers, or other midlines do very well against the special. And so Ballpoint now has to deal with not just the main weapon having a problem, but also the special having a problem with most weapons it's going to go against. Meaning despite having such a strong kit, it's dealing with a lot of harsh counters. So what exactly can be done to fix these issues? For some of these weapons, I think they fall into the realm where they need kit help. Mini is an obvious one where I think it does need a proper supportive kit to enable the team to go in. Something like Torp and Booyah Bomb comes to mind. The location utility and enhanced fighting capability would give it a niche compared to similar options like Neosplash, while it would enable other options. Heavy Splatling is another weapon that could really use something like this. It's seen a bit more success against other anchor weapons when it had subs or specials to help deal with it, notably Splash Wall to block enemy shots, or things like Booyah Bomb to displace opponents at a distance. This would also help deal with the fact that Heavy has lackluster specials in the first place. Something like Splash Wall Inkstorm comes to mind for me. However, I think for other options, it's a little bit more complicated. Nautilus, for example, used to be a menace in Splatoon 2 because it got to bully a lot more shorter range weapons. Fixing Nautilus to compete with other midlines as well could make it even more oppressive in a different meta. And despite its kits being a bit weaker than they could be, they're not bad by any means to the point where I think a third kit is necessary to save them. So it's hard to see a fix for something like Nautilus that doesn't involve toning back other midline options. Ballpoint is in a very similar boat to Nautilus. However, Ballpoint has also been toned back so significantly that I think it is possible to fix the weapon by reverting some of its other changes. Giving Inkjet something like a slightly faster strafe speed to deal with its counters, or Ballpoint its old run speed back would be a great way to start. Ballpoint used to be incredibly fast when charging or in short range mode, and the ability to mix up that faster strafe speed would help a lot against many of these weapons that punish its more predictable movement. Finally, I haven't talked about Hydra very much so far, but in addition to suffering from a lot of these problems, Hydra is just a very extreme weapon, one that's only gotten more extreme over time. Its charge time is the longest in the game at 2.5 seconds, and it fires for an entire 4.3 seconds, both of these being up significantly from Splatoon 1. Even its damage is up a lot. Hydra used to be a consistent 28 damage that now deals a whopping 40 damage when fully charged. This creates a weapon that is much more extreme in its flaws and strengths. When it's able to get a charge off more reliably, it can feel almost impossible to contest, unless you're playing a charger. Whereas on the other side of things, if there's plenty of displacement like bombs or other specials to deal with it, it can feel like Hydra never gets a charge. I think the solution to this is actually toning the weapon back down a little bit. Make its charge time a little bit faster like it used to be, but also have it fire for a bit shorter. Something like a 240 frame charge time and 3.5 second firing time. However, I think the main thing Hydra needs is some form of charge hold. This should be slower than all other charge holds and should not work when the weapon's actually firing. But I think if displacement forced you to take longer to charge the weapon, rather than completely resetting your charge, it would feel a lot more fair. It would still be a very slow powerhouse of a weapon, just one that would actually get the time to fire. And since we toned back how long it would be able to fire, it wouldn't be as oppressive. Oh yeah, and Edit Splatling is here. This weapon just seemed to get pretty lucky, honestly. Despite having similar charge time issues to Hydra, the weapon's mobility stats being ripped from Mini as well as solid partial charges means it doesn't suffer from this issue as much. The insane ink efficiency, mobility, and paint output of the weapon also lend naturally to its two very strong kits, where it can easily either play to its Crab Tank or Tacticooler. This weapon sees plenty of use, even in some comps over pencil or on bad pencil maps in tournament play. This is the Splatling I was referring to at the beginning that is just fine. So to wrap things up, the unfortunate part is I think without third kits, it's hard to fix a lot of Splatling's current issues, and a lot of this stems from not understanding that the class has some really harsh counters that need to be accounted for in its toolkits. But at the same time, if Splatlings want to succeed more long-term, it might mean eventually addressing the larger issue, which is longer range counters like chargers need to be toned back in a way that the matchup is more even. And I think weapons being such a hard counter that it forces the other person to switch off is not something that really feels great for the game. While this issue has been avoided in the past, I think it might be necessary to change in the future. As for now though, I could see an era where Splatlings see a little bit more usage, especially considering other midline options were toned back recently. So we'll have to see what happens. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time.